All right, guys, welcome back. So first of all, Happy New Year. We're now in 2025. 2024 is over. I've been waiting to do my recap video. I know that a lot of people did theirs after the last UFC card, UFC Tampa, which made sense for most people because not everybody does regionals, but I knew that Octagon still had a card, and I knew that Risen still had a card. So I waited for both of those. I bet on both of those. Lost a little bit of money on both of those. Lost like 0.1 units on Octagon, and I lost like 2 units on Risen, which was unfortunate because for Risen, honestly, both of my bets could have won. 2 out of 3 could have. Akitomo wasn't a great bet, but the other two, the Suzuki bet, I thought that was a solid one. He lost, but like it was a winnable fight, and I got him up like plus 240, which I think is still is a misprice. And then I also had Yaman, who had a pretty good performance, made a guy who doesn't wrestle, and it was a winnable fight for him as well. And I think I played him at like plus 375. So that was unfortunate end of the year, but it's okay. And the way we're going to do this video, so it's going to be 2 parts. First, we're going to recap 2024. We're going to go over my results, how I did, some lessons. I had a few lessons and rules from 2023 going into 2024. I'll talk about how those went, and then I'll talk about my lessons and rules going into 2025 and how I want to approach betting this year. And then after we're done with that, we're going to do the Couch Warrior MMA Awards. You know, everybody's been doing their own. I'll be doing my own as well. I have a bunch of categories listed out. Some of them are the basic ones. Some of them are a little different. And we'll do that, and then we'll hop out of here. Shouldn't take too long. And then you guys could be expecting the UFC Vegas, I think it's 101 now or 102, breakdown from me next week on Tuesday, as always. I'm going to start taping it probably today. I already taped a few fights. I have one parlay. I parlayed Aliyev and I parlayed Tulio together for 4 units at like minus 189. I'll talk about that. I'll break down all those bets, all those plays. I'll be breaking it down. I'll be talking about it next Tuesday. And any bets or any notes that I make like leading up to that, that's all going to be on my free Discord as always. And I'll put the link to that Discord in my description of this video. And let's dive into it. So last year in 2023, and that was my first ever negative year, right? So in 2021, that was my first year tracking. I started tracking about, I think, halfway through the year or like at the end of the year, and I was up 24 units, 4% ROI. Then in 2022, I was up 95 units, ROI of 7%. I was pretty proud of that year because I started off terribly, and I was like negative 50, and then I ended up plus 95, so that's like 140 unit swing there. I was proud of that. And then last year in 2023, I lost 13.7 units for a minus 1 ROI. That sucked. Just had a hard time last year, wasn't able to get it together. And then this year, started off great, then kind of hit not a great little run. And then it came around. I had a bunch of good winning events in a row, a few hot streaks. And going into the last few weeks of 2024, I was doing real well. And then I lost like 8 units on PFL and then another like 5 units on UFC. So that kind of hurt the profits. But overall, I won 49.1 units. I staked only 567 units. So I got a 9% ROI. That's the best ROI I've had to date. So I'm proud of that. And I'm also pretty proud of the fact that I was able to lower my stakes. I've always been a volume bettor. I put out a ton of bets. I bet on volume. I bet numbers. And over a large sample size, I tend to profit. I do think I have an edge over the market. I've been able to keep up with the market. A lot of things have changed. KOs have become less common, then they become more common. Judging has made things really difficult because damage became over control, but not all judges actually do it. So that's all been difficult, but I've been able to bring down that number. So in 2022, I staked 1.3 thousand units. In 2023, I staked 1.1 thousand units. And then this last year in 2024, I brought it all the way down to 567. So I'm making less plays when I make a play, trying to be more confident in it. And it seems to be working for me. So let's talk about the lessons going into from 2023 into 2024. My main things were for underdogs. There was a lot of times where I was playing them real small instead of putting like a half unit or a unit, even though I was just as confident in those as I was in a favorite that I was playing. So that was a lesson that I wanted to work on, and I think I did it. I played a lot of underdogs. I played them with my gut, with my chest, played them for a unit or a half unit, sometimes even more, depending on the play. So I did that. I went into the year telling myself, into 2024, telling myself that I wasn't going to play any more chalky spreads, the plus 3.5s, the minus 3.5s, or the 5.5, because the way I felt about it was, even if you have a perfect read and the person you picked for the spread plus 3.5, for example, won one round for sure, and all the judges gave it to them except one. It only took one bad judge who gave a 30-27 when it wasn't deserved, and that cooks your bet on the spread. And if you lay chalk, that really sucks. And for me, in 2023, I lost a lot of those bets because of that, because of one rogue judge. So going into this year, I told myself only playing spreads that are plus money, and I did that. I don't think I played any spread that was chalk, and I did pretty well with those. I profited, I think, on most of the ones I played. So I'm glad with that. Another rule of mine was no more chalky totals, like minus 250 on over 1.5 or something like that. Stop doing that. For the most part, stop doing that. That's another one. That's a lesson / goal going into 2025 as well. I want to keep working on that because I still did play some chalky ones when I didn't have to. I'm not saying I'll never play a chalky total, because sometimes there is still value, even if the line is like minus 200 or minus 175, something like that. Sometimes there's still value. I just have to work on it, tweak that a little bit more. So that's one of my main lessons going into this year is I want to keep working on the totals, get a little bit better at those, maybe start playing more unders, under 1.5s. I've always shied away from them because it's just stressful for me, like needing a finish in 7.5 minutes. I hate it. But sometimes I'm passing up on money that's on the table. So need to work on that a bit. And then going into this year, so going into 2024, like I said, I wanted to be more confident and play more, stake more on my underdogs. This year, I need to find a balance, because while I did do much better and I was able to profit a lot off of my underdog plays this past year, even though underdogs were not cashing well, I'm a prime, like if you guys watch my stuff, if you know me, I primarily bet underdogs. I'll play favorites as well, but I feel more comfortable playing dogs, not having to stake a ton on one fighter. So that's paid off for me. I've done well, but I've also donated back a lot. Like for PFL, right? The most recent card, I believe it was PFL Europe. Yeah, no, it was the PFL championships in the 2024 championships. I lost 8 units because I bet so many underdogs, and like the bets were solid, I guess. Like I see where I was coming from when I made them, but some of them just were a little bit forced, I think, and some of them just didn't go my way. That happens, but some of them I think were a bit forced. Didn't need to do that. So I really need to work on that. I need to make sure I have to find like a balance with my estimated edge. Like if if a line indicates that a fighter's like, what, I don't know, 20%, right? And I'm like, nah, I think they win at least 3 out of 10 times or 4 out of 10 times. So they should be like 30, 35%, maybe 40. Maybe I don't need to play that, because I still think they're going to lose at a pretty high clip, right? Maybe if the implied probability is 20%, I think it's 40, that I should play. But if it's like 20% and I think it should be like 30, maybe I still shouldn't play it. That's some stuff I need to work on, because I'm donating too much. I did really well and I won a lot of units on bets that I was confident in, and then lost a lot on bets that I was not confident in. And then another thing with like pick'ems or closely lined fights, if I think it's going to be close, I need to just leave it alone, because sometimes I'll try a little too hard to pick a side on a pick'em or on a close line, and it ends up being a close fight. And often the decision won't go my way, especially with the way judging has been recently. So I got to be more careful with that too. I think that's a big thing going into this new year of 2025. And let me see if there's anything else. Big thing for me from 2023 into 2024 was I needed to cut out the parlays because I was doing horrible on them. I because in 2023 my money lines were very profitable. I believe it was, yeah, in 2023 I had a 3% ROI on straight bets, but that was a losing year still because on parlays I lost 27 units, 14% minus 14% ROI in 2023 on parlays. Now going into in 2024, I did limit the parlays. I did a lot less, only usually 2 legs, 3 legs if it's super chalky, but I felt like they all had really easy fights. I would do those, but it always kept it to 1 or 2 parlays per card, and I've been stricter with them and they've been working. So I'm not going to say I'm done with parlays altogether because I know myself, I'm definitely not done. And I think there's still some value to be had in parlays sometimes. But I just have to keep going with what I've been doing with that, be a little bit more strict, a little bit more careful. And I think it's going to work out. And the last thing going into this year, I want to do less method props. I think I'm donating too much on methods. I'm decent at them. I'd say I hit them at a pretty good clip. I think I have good reads, but it's really method props are really tricky, and ripping them almost every single card, like it's going to be hard to consistently hit those. At least for me, I'd say that I'm better with money lines than anything else. I think my totals are pretty good too. That's probably my second best area are my totals. But in terms of methods, I don't think I'm the greatest. I do decent sometimes with my round threes or my round twos and methods, or just a round two or round three. Done pretty well with those this year. They made me some money, but got to keep working on bringing those down because I only stake like, I'll do like a quarter unit on a method or like a half unit on a method. And at the time, it doesn't seem like much, but it adds up. Over time, it adds up. Over all the cards over the year, it adds up. So I gotta do less of that. I think this year I'm gonna do primarily money lines. I'll keep my totals, but be a little bit more strict, and keep the parlays, but be a little bit more strict. Don't need to have a parlay every card. I've been good at that, and I want to keep working on that. So that's pretty much it for lessons. Recap. Like I said, great year overall. Really proud of the fact that I brought down my units staked. I would still call myself a volume slash numbers guy, but definitely lowering that volume. I don't need to stake 1,000 units a year. That's too much risk, and I want to keep that up. So this year, hopefully going to keep the stakes similar, maybe 500, 600 units staked by the end of the year, give or take. And yeah, this past year won 49 units with a 9% ROI. And next year, or this year now, I would really like a double digits ROI, 10% minimum. That would be nice. So that's it for that. That's it for the recap. Now we can jump into the fun stuff. I do have a ton of awards ready to go. Was going to make graphics, but honestly, I feel like it's not super necessary. Let me know what you guys think for each category in the comments, what you think should have won, who you think should have won the category, or what fight, because some of them are for fights, some of them are for people. And let me know what you guys think for each one. Let me know if you disagree with me. I know a lot of you often do disagree with me. I got some interesting takes sometimes, and if you disagree, please let me know. I love to hear it. I try to respond to everybody in the comments unless it's something outrageous. 99% of my comments these days are my eyebrows. So if that's what makes you comment, let me know. That's fine. That's cool too. But ideally, talk to me about the awards. Let me know what you guys think. So for the first one, this is no particular order. It's just the order I did it in. For some of them, I picked like a specific one who's going to win the award, but then I have what's the word for it? Runner-ups. I have runner-ups for most of the categories, and I'll talk about all of them. So let's start with Rookie of the Year. So Rookie of the Year was pretty easy for me. I picked Carlos Praches. I think that he's clearly the guy. Hold on. I definitely. Okay, yeah. For a second, I was like, did I get his first name wrong? And then I got it right. So Carlos Prates, he was my Rookie of the Year. Made his debut. He won 4 fights. He had 4 fights, knocked them all out, and he had some big wins too. He beat the Leech, knocked out the Leech. That was super impressive. And then he had a main event against Neil Magny, put Magny away in a really in really dominant fashion. So for me, it was a no-brainer. The runner-ups for this one, I had Gene Silva, and also obvious one, another Fight Nerds guy, also a beast, came in here, knocked out Weston Wilson. Then he had, I don't remember all the fights in order, but he knocked out Charles Jourdain. Then he went up. He finished Drew Dober, which is super impressive. He did finish him, right? I'm pretty sure he did. And overall, I'd say he did really well, and I'm excited to see how he'll do in 2025. And the other runner-up I had, I didn't really hear this guy mentioned much over like listening to other people's awards and stuff. I didn't hear his name mentioned much for Rookie of the Year, but I think that Chris Padilla definitely deserves something because he came in against James Lontop. He was a big underdog. Not a lot of people gave him a chance. I certainly did not. And he came in there, was able to finish Lontop as a big underdog. That was super impressive. And then he fought Rong Zhu, I believe it was, and another impressive performance as a big underdog. Also finished him. So definitely got to give him credit these days. I'm going to be a lot more high on him going forward. And I do think he deserves at least an honorable mention. So he's getting an honorable mention from me, Chris Padilla. But overall, the winner of Rookie of the Year, in my eyes, is Carlos Prates. Then I had most improved fighter. I went with Yusuf Zalal for this one because for me, Zalal has improved leaps and bounds. He got cut from the UFC, came back, finished Billy Q, finished Jarno Aarons, made him seem like he had no ground game whatsoever. And Aarons is low-key a good grappler, and Zalal made it seem like that was not the case. And then he finished and retired Jack Shore, which is also really impressive. And I have to give him credit. You know, before that, he was often a decision fighter. He wasn't really finishing guys. He was grappling, but not finishing. And now the striking seems improved. He's more powerful. The grappling is even better. And he's still super young. So for me, it was clearly Yusuf Zalal. But the runner-up, I think it was also really close. For me, it's Charles Johnson. The only reason he didn't win it for me is because I feel like he's improved, but he was always pretty good, you know? Like, I don't even think he's gotten that much better. He was just already good in my eyes. I just think that he's been able to turn the ship around. So at least an honorable mention for me, Charles Johnson. But the winner of most improved fighter for me is Yusuf Zalal. Then I did most dominant performance of the year. There were a few this year. I ended up picking Fluffy versus Pereira. Just because it's hard because do you pick a performance where it goes to a decision, but they were super dominant, or do you pick one where they get a finish and it's really fast? It's hard to decide. I went with Fluffy and Pereira though, because Fluffy just massacred him. 10 takedowns. I think the significant strike count was 120-20. Just beat him from pillar to post. Pereira never had a shot in that fight. So I had to give that one to Fluffy Hernandez for most dominant performance of the year. My runner-ups were O'Malley and Vera. O'Malley styled on Marlon Vera. Bilal versus Edwards. I thought that Bilal was pretty damn dominant there, and it was very impressive because a lot of people did give him a chance, like myself, but many people counted him out. He was a big underdog, and he had a super dominant performance, so he's definitely a runner-up for me. Chimaev over Whitaker. That's the one where I was between Fluffy and Pereira or Chimaev Whitaker, because Chimaev just came out there and he just ran through my guy, Bobby Knuckles. That was devastating as a Bobby Knuckles fan, but it was certainly impressive for Chimaev. And then the last runner-up for me for that one was Bobby Green versus Miller. Miller had a decent first round, but after that, Bobby just kind of ran through him. So I had to give that one a runner-up spot. After that, I had performance of the year. I gave it to Umar against Sandhagen. I just thought that, they gave Umar a major step up. Everyone was like, oh my God, Sandhagen's plus 200, plus 250. This is a huge step up for Umar. Have to go with Corey, take the shot. I didn't do that. I thought Umar would win, and he did win. He was very dominant, very impressive, and Sandhagen is an elite guy still. He's far from washed. He's still a great fighter. So for me, that deserved performance of the year. For fighter of the year, this one has been pretty much split with everybody. Everybody has gone with either Pereira or Topuria, and it makes sense. The two most high-profile guys who probably deserve it. Pereira just showed up anytime they told him that he needed him, and he got the job done every single time. But ultimately, I picked Topuria just because I think his wins are more impressive. Pereira, he did an amazing job. He looked fantastic, but the competition wasn't the best, and not everybody even believed those guys deserved the chance to fight him at that point. Meanwhile, Topuria pulled up, knocked out one of the greatest featherweights of all time in Alexander Volkanovski, and then came and knocked out the other one of the other greatest featherweights of all time in Max Holloway. So my favorite too. You guys see him in the back over there. So for me, I had to give it to Topuria. Finished two legends, gave Max his first ever knockout loss, and the dude's a beast. So for me, fight of the year is Topuria. But I wanted to do a non-champion fighter of the year just because it's kind of unfair. You know, there's so many other guys who had amazing performances this year, and they aren't even in the running for fighter of the year because of Topuria and because of Pereira. So for me, I did a separate one. I did a few separate ones. So we're gonna do non-champion fighter of the year. We're gonna do female fighter of the year, and we're gonna do non-UFC fighter of the year. So for non-champion fighter of the year, I went with Charles Johnson. For me, the turnaround has been really impressive. He got 4 wins in a row this year. I believe it was in a row. And he's just really turned it around. You know, he was a guy where early on in his UFC career, you can see the talent. You can see he's clearly a very good fighter, but he was often very hesitant, wasn't really getting the job done, was giving up third rounds often, even though he was the guy with better cardio. And then he just turned it around. He came in this year and he got 4 impressive wins. He beat Hadley. He beat Sumaderji in a good fight. He knocked out Josh Van. I just thought it was, and I believe Azat Maxim was also this year. So for me, it was pretty easy. Non-champion fight of the year. I like Charles Johnson. I think Diego Lopez also is up there. He was my runner-up, but like his wins were good. Don't get me wrong. And like coming in and fighting Ige on short notice, super impressive. And he's like blasted himself up in the weight class. But I just felt like Charles Johnson did more for me personally. Like I'm not crazy about the wins that Lopez did get. Like Ortega, it's a good win, but I don't really know where Ortega's at these days. And the Dan Ige fight, honestly, I thought it wasn't that impressive considering Ige pulled up on like 30 minutes notice. So I went with Charles Johnson. For female fighter of the year, I split it up to UFC and non-UFC just because I feel like the non-UFC one has to be mentioned. For the UFC female fighter of the year, I picked Natalia Silva. I just think that she's the one with the most momentum going into this year of 2025. She had the 2 wins over Viviane Araujo and Jessica Andrade, and the Andrade performance was really impressive. And I just think she's elite. I think that she's got a good chance of becoming champ this year. So I had to go with her. And then my non-UFC one, pretty easy to guess, Dakota Dacheva. I have been trying to fade her for a few fights now. I felt like there's no way that she's so young. She's so new to MMA. She's a striker. I was like, there's no way she's going to be able to handle high-level grapplers. And she just dismantled Tyler Santos, absolutely dismantled her. She was way too big, way too physical. Her striking is really good. And the takedown defense and get-ups looked great, too. She was not easy to get down. She was not easy to hold down. So for me, definitely Dakota Dacheva for non-UFC female fighter of the year. I was just very, very impressed with the work she's done. And I'm curious to see how it goes for her. I hope she ends up in the UFC. I think at this point, PFL is probably a dead end for her, but we'll see. And then after that, my non-UFC fighter of the year overall is Shamil Musayev. I think that he's another guy who came onto the scene in PFL. And a lot of us saw clearly that he's a very talented striker. But I was like, you give this guy a good grappler and he's screwed. And he finishes Logan Storley. Then he beats Ramazan Muradov, I believe is the name. Another guy who went into that fight undefeated. Musayev finished him. And then they fought again immediately after. And then he beat him again in a dominant decision. And then he came out there and then he beat Umulatov also in dominant fashion. So Musayev for me, definitely the non-UFC fighter of the year. Dude's an absolute animal. Really excited about his career. And he's another guy who I really hope ends up in the UFC. I don't know if he will, but I'm hopeful that he will. And I'd really like to see that one. Now, knockout of the year. It's pretty easy. And because it's unfair, I'm going to go through a list of other ones that I think are almost as deserving. And I just feel like they kind of got screwed because for KO of the year, it has to be Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. Holloway came out there as a big underdog, had a dominant performance from pillar to post, And then, I mean, what kind of finish is that? Dude points to the center, they meet up, and then they just let it rip. And with like 1 second left on the clock, Holloway clips him, puts him to sleep. It was legendary. I wasn't even watching at home. We had to go out that day. It was a friend's birthday. I was at their house watching the fights. And when that knockout happened, I just screamed out loud. Everybody turned around to see what I was yelling about. It was so good. So obviously, Holloway gets that award just like everybody else gave it to him. But I do want to talk about the runner ups because it's just not fair. And there were so many good knockouts this year. So Shara Magomedov versus Petrosian, the double spinning back fist. That was epic. Fares Ziem versus Frivola. I did not think that would happen. Ziem has always been a decision guy for me, and he put Frivola to sleep with that knee. Topuria knocking out Holloway obviously has to be mentioned. Holloway won the KO of the year, but he got knocked out himself for the first time this year, and it was very nice by Topuria. I gave Oliveira versus Sopaj an honorable mention because that was a nasty knockout, nasty knee in a fight that he was losing. Whitaker versus Aliskerov, another one where I did not expect that at all. Whitaker came out there, was able to put away Aliskerov early. This one is one of my favorite ones. Ming Shi versus Feng. That happened recently in UFC Macau. Ming Shi just came out there. She's losing that fight, and the doctor gets a head kick knockout. It was beautiful. Ribovich versus McKinney, also a really nice knockout. Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Have to give that to Poirier. He's a big underdog in that fight. BSC was everybody's new hot prospect, and Poirier just stopped the hype, was able to put him away. Bruno Ferreira versus Phil Hawes, another nice knockout. I didn't even realize that was 2024. I didn't know Phil Hawes was still in the UFC in 2024, but he was. Let me just double check that. I know that I checked already, but let me just double check. Is his nickname really No Hype, or is someone trolling on Tapology? Because that's hilarious. Yeah, that was 2024. Okay, yeah, so that's definitely an honorable mention. Who else? Charles Johnson versus Joshua Van in that third round. Have to give him a mention for that one. He was. I don't even think he was down. I think it was tied going into round 3 on one judge's scorecard, and then one of them had Charles actually up, and the other one had Van up. So he still could have won that fight, but that was a nice knockout. No one thought he'd be knocking out Van in the third. And then Yoel Alvarez versus Drakkar Close. That's a more recent one, but that one was just brutal. I mean, he hurts him on the feet, puts him in a gilly, but instead of choking him, he just keeps punching him and puts him out. That was really cool. So that's the honorable mention, the last one. But the winner, KO of the year, is Holloway over Gaethje. Sub of the year, I was pretty torn because there were a few good ones here. I know a lot of people like the Islam Poirier one. That one makes a lot of sense. It was an absolute war. Poirier had a much better performance than most people expected, and Islam put him away late. But for me, I had to go with Chimaev over Whitaker for sub of the year, just because Chimaev came out there. He was fighting a guy in Whitaker with elite takedown defense, and he just tapped him with pure just strength, the grip on the guy. He displaced his teeth. Have to give it to Chimaev there. And then honorable mentions, like I said, Islam Poirier was one of them. Paddy Pimblett over Bobby, that deserves a mention as well. Jimmy Flick over Gordon, not spoken about enough in my opinion. Flick came out there as an underdog against Gordon, was losing for a second there, and then came out there and subbed him. And the last one for me was Weston Wilson versus Jekka Saragi. Wilson, a huge underdog. Everybody thought Saragi would just come out there and knock him out. And Wilson cooked him on the ground, got the sub, got his first UFC win. So for me, that's up there. But overall, I went with Chimaev over Whitaker. For fight of the year, I went with Rebecca versus Oralby. I know a lot of people picked Holloway versus Gaethje for fight of the year. I feel like that's just kind of lazy. No offense. I feel like it wasn't fight of the year. It was fun. It was an awesome performance, but it wasn't really that competitive. So I don't think that's deserving. For me, it was one of two fights, right? It was either Zelubur versus Ribovich or Rebecca versus Oralby. I ended up going with Rebecca and Oralby just because I like grappling a lot too. And that was just an absolute war. Grappling, scrambling, striking. Oralby's just faces all beat up, and the dude is a beast. He just kept going. So I love that fight. That's the one I went with. But Zeljubar Ribovic, close second. Also an awesome fight and a great card in UFC 306. That was probably one of the best fights of the card, if not the best. It was the best fight of that card. So that was my second place, but I went with Rebecca versus Oral by just an awesome fight. But both of those fights, I could watch them over and over. Really, really fun stuff. I wanted to do a non-UFC fight of the year, and I went with Lewis McGrillen versus Dean Garnett. If you haven't seen that fight, you have to check it out. Garnett was an underdog. He's an older guy, but he came out there and it was an absolute war between the two of them. Everybody was going crazy. And then Evans was able to get the knockout, but I definitely thought that deserved it. I did a post-fight interview of the year. I went with Moicano's speech about his dad having a kid, but really you can go with almost any Moicano speech because they're always hilarious. And close second for me was Nate Landwehr in where was it? I forgot what card it was, but when I think it was when he beat Emmers. So that was up there for me. And obviously Brian Battle's speech in France, that was also up there for me. But I'm a little salty with Brian Battle right now, just because I'm a big fan, but I don't like when fighters like I like when fighters are a heel, but you got to be smart about what you're being a heel about, and like missing weight. I feel like that's when you put that to the side and you're just like, yeah, I shouldn't have missed weight. That was unprofessional, and he kind of did the opposite. So a little salty with him these days. Not really, but that's one of the reasons I wouldn't put him as the number one because Moicano's just coming out there and being a pro every time. So post fight interview of the year, Moicano's speech about his dad. That's it. And then comeback of the year. This one was tough because there were a few options. I almost went with Magny versus Mallet because he was such a big underdog and he also cashed me a huge ticket there in the uh, round three prop for Magny. And then Mingxi versus Fang was also close for me because Mingxi came out there. She's losing, and then she got that head kick. But overall, for comeback of the year, my winner is Moicano over Turner. They came out there. Moicano was the underdog. I bet him there. Turner pretty much knocked him out in the first round. Could have gotten the finish if he tried. And then Moicano came out there, took him down, and finished him himself in the second. So I had to pick that one. That's my comeback of the year. Upset of the year was kind of tough because there's been a few big upsets. I ended up picking Fernandez's win over Kong Wang. Kong Wang was a huge favorite there. Fernandez was a plus 700 underdog. I did bet her there, and she was able to hurt Wang and then finish her on the ground. So for me, as a plus 700 underdog, had to pick that one. And then the other ones that were my honorable mentions, I had Ming Shi's win over Fang that we've mentioned a few times now. Dan Hooker over Gamrot as like a plus 250 underdog. I had Hooker there too. That was a nice upset, great fight. Breshke versus Walter Walker, another big underdog that cashed this year. I think he was like plus 400. And then I picked two Dana White's Contender Series fights that were in the running and are my runner-ups. And those are Voivodkin over Schoenfelder on the Contender Series. I think Voivodkin was also a plus 700 underdog. I bet him. And then Dubin over Clark. She was plus 1,000, I believe. And I bet Dubin too. And she got that knockout. That was crazy. But upset of the year winner for me is Fernandez over Wang. Then fumble of the year, I went with Piera Rodriguez losing to Carnelossi via headbutt because why? She was so dominant. She's winning that fight, doing a great job, and just keeps headbutting Carnelossi until she gets disqualified. And then my runner-up was Almeida getting knocked out by Blades for no good reason. I mean, I don't really, to this day, I still don't understand what happened. It looked like Blades got him with an uppercut when he was coming in, but it was just weird, and it was a fight that I think Almeida could have won. But overall, fumble of the year, Piera Rodriguez headbutting Carnelossi to a DQ. Then I have the career turnaround of the year award. I almost gave it to Charles Johnson, but I already gave him non-champion fighter of the year, so I didn't want to give him two. So instead, I went with a close second. I went with Dominic Reyes. He came in here. Everybody thought he was done. He knocked out Jacoby. And then he came out there and he finished Anthony Smith as well. So Dominic Reyes for career turnaround. After that, I did. How many more do we have left? Only a few more. All right. After that, I did robbery of the year. This one was tough because we had a ton of robberies this year. I picked Fakhretdinov over Liao just because I feel like that one was like probably the most blatant, where Liao was a big underdog, clearly beat him. Clearly, like 30-27 Liao would have made more sense than 29-28 Fakhretdinov. And I'm pretty sure Fakhretdinov got a 30-27, which makes zero sense. Seemed like home cooking for sure. And that was definitely my robbery of the year. But the runner ups, Gone versus Volkov, that one's recent. I had Gone, I had a parlay with him, and I did not think he won. I thought that was a terrible bet on my part. Volkov clearly won the rematch, and they robbed him. Sergey Side versus Armfield, another robbery. I didn't have any bets there, but I did think that Armfield clearly won, and anybody who had his money line got robbed. Chepe versus Morgan Charrier. Thought that was a robbery. I had Charrier, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I thought he clearly won and he got robbed. And then Hubbard versus Figlak. I didn't have anybody there, but giving that win to Hubbard didn't really make much sense to me. But overall, robbery of the year for me is Fakhretdinov versus Liao. Then I did debut of the year. I had to give it to Felipe Lima in his win over Naimov. It was just really impressive. He's this kid off the regionals that not many people knew. He came up on short notice, had to fly across the world to get to the fight, was up in a weight class because he's a bantamweight and he fought at featherweight. And it was a tough fight for him. He wasn't, winning the entire time, but he came out there. He got the job done in the third. He got the submission, cashed a lot of people around 3 submission prop at like plus 5,000. I wasn't one of them, but I had his money line, and that was a really good performance. So I had to give that to him. Then for gym of the year, I went with Fight Nerds. Pretty easy. Don't really have to expand on that too much. They've been doing amazing between Carlos Prates, Kai Barallo, Gene Silva, Bruno Brazil turned it around. So gym of the year for me is Fight Nerds. Card of the year, easy, UFC 300. One of the best cards in recent history for sure. Just an awesome card from beginning to end. Crazy matchups. And a lot of awesome things happened, like Holloway knocking out Gaethje. Moicano got the upset there. Kayla Harrison made her debut. Alex Pereira's knockout over Jamal Hill was really impressive there with the whole stoppage too. He's just like chill with Herb Dean and then knocks him out. And close second though for card of the year for me was Noche UFC 306. I thought it was a great card, mostly because Merab won and I love Merab. Then for breakthrough fighter of the year, this one was tough because there were a few for me, but I ended up going with Buckley just because he came out here. I believe it was also 4 wins this year, and he's catapulted himself to the top of the division with the win over Colby Covington. So I had to give it to him. My runner-ups were Diego Lopez, because he's another guy who came out here this year, wasn't at the top of the division, and now he is. Charles Johnson is another one. I've talked about him plenty of times this video. Yusuf Zalal, I mentioned him earlier. I think he's had a breakthrough this year too. He's got a fight coming up now against Calvin Kattar. A win there should start putting him in the title picture. And then Lerone Murphy also is up there for me because I feel like he's another guy who not everybody talks about all the time, but he's consistent. He comes out there, gets the job done, and I think he's going to be getting a title shot in 2025 or early 26. And then Yoel Alvarez was another runner-up because he's been doing real well. But overall, it was pretty easy for me to go with Joaquin Buckley for Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. Then Best Underdog Bet of the Year. I just so happen to have most of these. Except I think 2 of them I didn't. But I went with Bilal over Leon for Best Underdog Bet of the Year. Bilal was a huge underdog in a fight where I felt like he clearly had a very good shot. I bet him, I think, for 2 units. And I thought he could outgrapple and outpace Leon, and that's exactly what he did. So I think that was the best underdog bet of the year. But runner-ups were Rebecca over Oralby. Rebecca was like plus 290. I had him there. That was great. Dan Hooker plus 250 over Gamrot. Had him there. Puna over Beza. I don't remember. I think I had Puna, but I don't remember for sure. That was a good underdog, I think. Volkov over Pavlovich. I didn't bet that one, but that was a great underdog bet that did hit. And then there were 2 that I think were really good but didn't cash. Liao over Renat. Mentioned that for the robbery of the year. Liao was like plus 2 something coming in. Not many people knew who he was. you only really knew who he was if you watched PFL, and it didn't cash because he got robbed, but it was a really good bet because it should have cashed. And Volkov over Gane in the rematch also didn't cash. I didn't have him there. I had Gane, but it was a robbery, and anyone who made that bet made a really good bet. And then for my my last award, it's worst person in MMA this year. So there's one person. I was gonna do a tie, but honestly, like, I don't want to give too much recognition to someone who doesn't really deserve it because they're doing things that I don't really like. Well, most people in the community don't like. So I'm going to leave one of them out of it. But the one that I will give the award to for worst person in MMA this year has to go to Don Davis. Just my God. Like, I love PFL. I've been a PFL fan since forever. I've always been saying I'm happy for them to be a co-leader if they can actually pull it off. I think it's good for the sport for there to be more than one promotion, but he's killing them. He's killing them. I know he's always been involved, but he didn't used to be the face of PFL. And all of a sudden this year, after they absorbed Bellator, he becomes the face of PFL, and he's terrible. He's just like, if I'm on that board, if I've got any kind of business interest in PFL, I am fighting tooth and nail to get Don Davis out of there. Like, keep him in the business, sure. I'm sure he's a great businessman. There's a reason he's there. But he's a terrible figurehead. He's a terrible person to be the face of the promotion. First of all, he doesn't watch fights. He said it himself. And that shows. That 100% shows in his work. Because if he said he didn't watch them, but then he was still doing an amazing job, okay. But you're doing a terrible job. Your matchmaking is awful. Most of your guys who you picked up from Bellator aren't fighting. You promised all these things to all of them. None of them are getting them. You have Cyborg complaining until they finally gave her the Pacheco fight. You had Patchy Mix complaining. You have Pitbull, who is at this point is begging to get out of his contract. Corey Anderson was complaining. They have such a good roster now. They had a great roster before. They had an even better roster after they bought Bellator. But instead of giving those people fights, this man is out here. His Twitter thumbnail, banner, whatever, is John Jones and Ngannou. All he ever talks about is John Jones and Ngannou. He's running freaking Twitter advertisements about John Jones and Ngannou, a fight he will never make. He will never make that fight, not under his promotion. There's zero chance. Dana is not going to agree to that. He doesn't like cross promotions, and he's certainly not going to give it to Don Davis. And it's just ridiculous. You have a beautiful roster of fighters, guys like Patchy Mix, who can come into the UFC and probably fight for a title right away. And you're sitting them on the sidelines. And instead, you're just talking about a fight that you're not going to make. And even if he had a slight chance of making it, even if he does, why not focus on your other guys too? You know, Dana's not out here only promoting one fight at a time for an entire year. He's promoting a ton of fights the entire year and trying to put together a lot of good fights, keeps his fighters active. And, you know, sometimes guys don't have as many fights as they would have liked in the year, but overall, you don't hear the same complaints coming out of fighters that feel like they're being sidelined, especially not champions. And from PFL, you do. So you have a guy here who says he doesn't watch fights, wasn't the figurehead of the promotion beforehand, and all of a sudden he's just out here and he's awful. He's awful. Before I never wanted to say anything because I like the PFL and I don't really want to say anything bad about them, but I don't even think I am because I still like PFL. I just don't like Don Davis. I think he's terrible for the sport. I think he's terrible for the promotion. And if PFL goes under, if they end up failing, I think it's 99% his fault because he's doing an awful job. He's doing an awful job. And instead of actually listening to people, he's laughing at people. He's saying things about his champions that he should not be saying. And like, even Kayla Harrison leaving for the UFC. I mean, be more salty, Jesus. Like the things he's saying, it's just like he's an embarrassment to the sport. So for me, it was pretty easy. Worst person in MMA award of 2024. Congratulations, Don Davis. Great job. And yeah, that's it, guys. That is my recap of the year. Those are my Couch Warrior awards. Thank you for tuning in, checking out my little ramble. And I appreciate all you guys. I appreciate all your support in 2024. The channel's growing. We're at like 2.4K subscribers now. I still remember when I first started the channel, I was stuck at like 30 subscribers for, I think, almost a year. And I was about to quit. I was about to quit, but I didn't. And I'm glad about where we are. I'm proud of it, and hopefully we keep growing. So thank you to all of you guys that watch my stuff, who tune in, who support the channel. Appreciate you guys big time. Even to the ones who don't love me, still appreciate you guys because you still help the algorithm. Hate or support, the algorithm doesn't care. So if you want to just keep hating, that's cool too. Just keep doing it in the comments section. That's ideal. And yeah, thank you guys all once again. And let's get it this year in 2025. Hopefully it's a good one for us.